Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I want to know why a noted television critic and author would write a whole book about Bill O'Reilly, the Fox network commentator. And who better to tell me than the author himself, Marvin Kitman. Hello.
Hi.
So why did you write this book about Bill O'Reilly?
Well, you know, I forget now. I wish I hadn't started on it. But I thought that O'Reilly was a very interesting newsman, and this was back in the early days of the O'Reilly factor. And I had always been critical of the commercial network news people, the whole Walter Cronkite syndrome of so-called objective news. And I was always looking for alternatives, and then I discovered Bill O'Reilly, who I started researching him, his life, and most people just think of him as another one of the yellers and screamers on cable news, and I never really liked cable network news because, you know, whenever I would stumble on a channel, there would always be this screaming and yelling, and I would think of this as yeller journalism, that they kept yelling and I would just turn it off. But O'Reilly seemed different than the others. And once again, there are two O'Reillys that I'm talking about. The early O'Reilly, which would be from 1996 to about 2003 or 2004. And I started looking into his life, and I discovered that he spent 25 years learning the craft of journalism, you know, starting at the local television news in Scranton and Dallas and Portland, Oregon, and Boston, and then he was at network news at CBS News and ABC News, and then of course he did syndicated television. And so it actually took him 25 years until he became an overnight smash at Fox News, and people only know that part of him. And I started realizing, about the early O'Reilly, that this is the alternative to the zombies we have on commercial television news. The people, these actors, you know, I'm
the deep voice and the standing there, right?
An anchor man, and I have come down from the mount with the tablets, and I'll, you know, the way they intone, like in the bottom of the well, and Walter Cronkite would say, and that's the way it is. And I kept saying, no, that's not the way it is. And I remember particularly during the Vietnam War, when, you know, like for 10 years he was mouthing the Pentagon line about how we were winning and how we were seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And they never told us that the light was coming from the train the other way. And
does he talk to you?
Who?
Walter Cronkite?
Yeah, Walter Cronkite.
He's a friend of yours, even when you slam him.
He talked to me. Well, he didn't seem to remember all my negative columns. That's the great thing
about getting older.
About getting older.
You know, I read this whole book. I read it. I mean, I haven't watched Bill O'Reilly very much, but I certainly know about him. The book is fascinating. It's a very interesting book. It's an Irish Catholic kid who grows up in Long Island, in Levittown, but he's not a blue-collar kid. I mean, he's a lower middle class, but his father was an accountant and everything. He goes to Catholic high school, he goes to Catholic college, and
right.
I know a little bit about this because I'm now married to a Catholic,
right.
Whose aunt lives in Levittown still.
His mother still lives there.
He does, yeah. And it was a very interesting book tracing his career in all the different stations, and he was a working news person. I mean, you're right. But he was always very egotistical, right? He was always there. He was impossible. He left a trail of...
As a 5-year-old, his ego was showing.
Enormous.
And, I mean, he does, that's one of his flaws. He does have a big ego. And as I say, probably by the next Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, there's going to be a Bill O'Reilly balloon, or just his ego will be.
Well, I spent
floating.
yesterday listening, 2 hours listening on the radio and an hour watching him on television, and somebody said to me, and I think you've also said it, that he's changed. I mean, it was the early Bill O'Reilly, then the Bill O'Reilly you saw.
Yeah.
But now he's gone, it seems to me, they say over.
There's been a major change. You know, when the show began and when I first became interested in him, it was really an investigative news story program. He would try to get stories that the other commercial networks were not using. And when you looked at the three, ABC, CBS, NBC, it was always the same story, the same snail daughter story, or, you know, all condensed into 23 minutes. And they say, and that's the way it is. But O'Reilly's team would come up with these middle American stories, and it was really well researched. They have the group of producers, of fact checkers, and so that was interesting. But in recent days, it's become he is, first of all, self-referential. He spends half the time on people who are attacking him or publications. If it's the Cowherders Gazette in Keokuk, Iowa, does a negative review of him, he'll then make that a hard news story. These far-left loonies in Keokuk, Iowa said this. And then the program, it's like half the program is his various attacks. And he does that because of his ego, because the media covers these fights that he has, you know, whether with David Letterman or Frank Rich. And so, but aside from that, that was bad enough. But lately, it seems that he invites people on, and instead of discussing with them, if you, Ronnie, would say something slightly off 2 degrees, he would come down on them in his really biting, nasty way. Hey, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a discussion.
Yeah, no discussion.
No discussion.
He disputes your facts. He plays games with you too. I mean,
because most people don't know how to handle this. It can be handled, but he's really out of control now, and I think the difference is so marked from the O'Reilly that I wrote about in my wonderful book about him, and now.
So now you have to disown him.
Well, you know, I mean, he's done so many things to make me disown him that we can get into that.
But he actually wasn't the first to go on the cable talk radio on that extreme right.
No, but first of all,
I can't call him an extreme right. Right, I'm wrong.
You've made several mistakes already because, you know, he's lumped together with Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, but he's not. He's got positions that. Some of them are very liberal positions. He's all over the lot.
Some of them are totally crazy.
Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, yes.
But he starts it by talking. He'd say to me, "You're an extreme leftist." So
far left loony.
Far left loony. That's what he did yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
he's
into that divisiveness. And he's crowned himself the voice of the blue-collar person in the country. How did that come about?
Well, you know, there's several different points. First of all, the geopolitical sense of what's far left, and you know the whole.
It's all confused.
His gyroscope is all wrong, you know, and he's out of whack.
Let's forget about him and talk about television news, because I agree with you. I worked at CBS in the 50s. I grew up with Barry Gray. Remember?
Hey, I remember.
That was interesting.
Mr. Controversial.
Yeah, right. He was controversial, but he wasn't that nasty to people, right?
Well, he let them talk. Bill doesn't let people talk.
Right, and he doesn't want to exchange any ideas or
anything.
anything.
Also, he has a problem of his format. The reason the show is successful is he's got these 5-minute segments, and half the time, theoretically, is the guest, and half the time is his, and then he says, and I will give you, Ronnie, the last word, and then he'll give you the last word. But wait a minute, we need a last word on top of the last word.
I was shocked, not shocked, I was annoyed that he says, or you wrote that he says, that his hero is Robert Kennedy. Because that is not, there is nothing like, no similarity between the two of them.
Well, but in his mind there is.
Yeah.
You know, and that's who his idol was, of having impact. He feels that
he thinks he relates to the blue.
Well, no, the doing something for society and running against the pack. Like, you know, he admired Kennedy because he took on, the civil rights issue, and his father said, don't do that, and he took on the mafia, don't do that, and he was his own man. Now, I remember what I was forgetting.
Okay.
You called him
fake, far right.
That's I list all of his liberal positions, and he is not Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity, these knee-jerk guys. But in his mind, to go back to the blue-collar issue, first of all, his father was white-collar, and his father was an accountant at an oil company, but the father grew up in this post-Depression age, and O'Reilly's father was really in a depression, and it affected the father's mind. The father was not able to leave this crummy job because of the fear of not getting another job. So Bill grew up with that, and so Bill is
the opposite.
Yeah, he's the opposite, but he's taken a lot of his father's and the grandfather's attitudes, and in his mind, even though he makes $50 million a year, he thinks that he's one of the folks.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you think you're blue collar, nobody wants to be blue collar today. That's what I was fascinated.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Everybody disguises the kind of job. If you're a garbage man, you're a sanitation engineer. But O'Reilly harks back to that, and if he wants to think of himself as blue collar,
let him do it.
Be my guest.
Yeah, but then he says he's the spokesman. I mean, he presents himself as being the spokesman. Anyway, he also has a reputation of being very tight. He never picks up a billet or anything, right?
Oh.
Let's not talk about that. I want to go back to news people.
That's the funniest thing about him.
with well, Eric Severide,
I think let's not talk about this. I got to keep a list.
Eric Severide, I think you talk about that. He gave the this and the that, right?
Eric
he was always
Severide,
balanced, right?
yes.
He had a nice voice, and he looked serious, so people thought he was a genius, but he wasn't really.
Eric Several Sides, as I called him, because he always, in 90 seconds, he get complicated questions. Here's this side, here's that side, and you decide.
Then we had Martin Agronsky.
Yes.
I loved him. I had a crush on him. He was opinionated. He gave the news. He had a beautiful voice, and he was opinionated. Do you remember him?
Oh, I remember.
Edward P. Morgan.
Yes.
That was another one.
Right. People forget, the so-called golden age of television news. They thought it was so-called objective. But
never.
These people gave opinions. You take Ed Murrow himself. Right. Nobody, he's the saint. And I went back and looked at Murrow's essays at the end of the program, and when he was against the atom bomb, he was against Chiang Kai-shek and the China policy, he was against the Truman Doctrine, which I grew up with, supporting all the fascist dictators in Greece. Anybody who was anti-communist. He was against corporations, he was against smoking, and I made a list in the book of all these issues, and he did these essays at the end, which were very much like O'Reilly's talking points at the beginning of the show. However, I make it clear that O'Reilly is definitely not Edward R. Murrow, but the similarity. Now, you mentioned, all those great CBS News guys, the Murrow boys. They were competent journalists to start with, and they were allowed to go in and report the news and tell you what they thought about it. Charles Collingwood. Even Eric Several Sides was a great correspondent. But he was smart. He saw the change taking place at CBS News. After Murrow created so many problems for Bill Paley because his friends in corporations were upset, and Congress was really,
Lyndon Johnson was the majority leader in majority leader in the Senate.
You can't allow this madman Murrow to continue like this. So Paley managed to push out Murrow, by cutting back on his programs with Fred Friendly, and Eric realized what was going on. You could no longer have opinions. They were all hiding behind this objective journalism, which CBS, and I love Frank Stanton, but he's the one that set all this up, to Congress. Hey, you guys can't criticize our news. We're fair and balanced. We're objective. And what they did was leach out the perspective. Here you had these competent journalists, and they were not allowed to tell you what was really going on, why all this crazy stuff was going on.
So now we've gone to the other extreme, though. You get Katie Couric, and you get everybody trying to be more human.
Oh, well, that's the
small
other
talk and news.
That's
news
the other terrible
the giggling
thing.
And the small talk is just,
that happened back in the 80s when they started getting the news doctors. You know, there was a decline in the network commercial audience, news audience. What's wrong here? What's wrong? Why aren't these people watching? These old people, they were depending on them. And so the news doctors came in and said, no, foreign news is all wrong. Nobody's interested in what's going on in Africa. So they started closing down their foreign news bureaus, and they started cutting back, and the only thing they cover is disasters now,
right.
Not any of the situation, why this is developing.
Well, is part of that because of the changing guard at the FCC and the change in networks?
No. This is because of the profit motive.
Right.
Because the news doctors say you have to give the people news they can use. You know, what's new with your liver and what's new in phobias? Here's a new phobia and things that and this is all nonsense news, because when you watch the news between the weather and the sports and your this problem,
the consumer advocate,
consumer,
and all that stuff.
yeah. So you have no room for news, and they thought that would make it more popular, and also they started getting more mediocre people being the newscasters. You know, especially in local news, it was people that other viewers can identify with. Yeah. So you have to be like their cousins. Well, I know my cousins. I would not want to know a single thing from my cousins. But we went through all of that in the 80s, and then, well,
you worked, I mean, you spent a life in newspapers, and newspapers are on their way out, it seems. I mean, the circulation of all papers is down. The advertising revenues, I mean, I just don't understand it. So television also is the bottom line. The news gets cutting back. Where are we going to get our news? It's all going to be on the internet, and are they going to be developed personalities the same way we see in the other in the papers and on television?
You know, it's a very serious problem.
Yeah.
Where we're going to get our news, and I think I think that we have incredible shrinking brains. And that we really we don't think we need too much news. There are some people who think that they're keeping up the news by watching Entertainment Tonight. Oh, I know all the news. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle going on. And where the news starts covering celebrities, look what happened with Anna Nicole Smith.
Oh, it was terrible.
I mean,
unbelievable.
But 3 of the cable network newses 24/7, and you know, well, what happened to the Iraq War? I mean, what happened to the immigration problem? What happened? All the issues disappeared.
Well, now
That's
we're back
insane.
and forth, but because it's a very big field and it's exciting. So here you have O'Reilly on one side. Now you got MSNBC as the counter to the Fox network, right?
Well,
their people.
Well, that's the sad thing.
Yeah,
you should have had an independent MSNBC, but as I explained in the book, when Fox started and O'Reilly started getting these big ratings from nowhere, the others, oh my God, we've got to get so-called right-wing guys to be yellers and screamers also. So MSNBC, despite having NBC News and everything, started imitating Fox.
By the left, though. They went to the left.
No, they're not.
Well, they're balanced. They got a couple of people.
I mean, the whole political orientation, I dispute. And because most of these people are centrists.
Who do you think does the best job?
But wait a minute. Then the worst thing was it affected CNN also. And they were responsible giving you news all the time. And they thought they had to get these Foxonian types in.
And they've also gotten more magazine type. That's the other thing. Everybody's now a magazine-type show, right? I mean, they've got Human Interest, they've got this.
CNN tried to go in that direction when they merged with Time Warner and getting all their magazines, but they failed all those magazines. That was the Rick Kaplan period at CNN.
I was amused that
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's all right,
way.
because we got so much to say in such a short time. I was amused that he doesn't like Bob Schieffer, because Bob Schieffer is one of my favorite commentators on television. I think Schieffer is terrific.
Right. But he doesn't like Bob Schieffer because he worked with him at CBS News, and Schieffer, O'Reilly was this, really gonzo journalist, and he had gotten these great stories during the riots in Argentina after the Falkland War. And he thought that he was going to be a hero finally. It was one of his first assignments, and his father in Levittown was going to see him, on the CBS News. And then the next day, he found out that Schieffer had used all of O'Reilly's riot footage, and Schieffer did the voiceover, so it seemed like Schieffer was in the midst of all the guns firing and everything. And this is called bigfooting, and it happens, is very common in broadcasting, but O'Reilly was saying, hey, I did the work, I should get the credit. Once again, this is his ego. And it was a major problem. CBS, hey, you're not going along. And they showed him the exit. And the great thing about O'Reilly is wherever he went, he was getting fired.
And then he always went up.
But he always went up because he knew how to use television. And he knew how to be a journalist. And somebody always wanted like a troublemaker like O'Reilly. Yeah. And he was always getting paid more money, which astounded his father. Hey, don't change jobs, whatever you do. And each level, he was getting more and more money. So that's a
So who do you think does the best job with the news?
That's a hard question. I don't think anybody does a good job. And the whole idea is that you have to sort of listen to a lot of them. Yeah. And I tell you, I was a Newsday, the TV critic at Newsday for 35 years. And watching television news, more and more I started reading newspapers. And I was fascinated, like the New York Times, the long, boring stories that actually jumped and they gave you all the details. Right. How long has this been going on? So I was, interested in the story. I would go around the dial. Everybody had exactly the same information, and not enough of it.
And they take it from the newspaper. I mean,
it's
always old news by the time you see it.
They take, and in the old days, newspapers were one level of information and television was another. But the bad things happen is that newspapers have started copying television. What the television, the cable network news is and the local, what they think is news then becomes a big story in print. And
so
that's
we're
the
dumbing
bad
down
thing.
America, huh? Or the world.
I think we have a very serious problem.
You have a website?
I have a website.
What do you have on your website?
It's my website from when I was the television critic. It was the Marvin Kitman show, and I was listed as the executive producer. And it had all of this great, it was really cutting edge website. And now, since I left the paper, and incidentally, a lot of people don't know I left, so I just want to explain. April 1st, 2005, we're coming to the second anniversary. And as I explained it, I was hired December 7th, 1969 by Newsday, a day that will live in infamy as far as the networks are concerned. And on April 1st, I've been there 35 years, and I announced that the paper had given me an audition, and after 35 years, we decided it was not working out. So at any rate, so the website now is being reconstructed to cover Marvin Kitman as the author of books like The Man Who Would Not Shut Up.
But the book I wanted to talk about, and we're running out of time, are the two books about George Washington, because they sound fascinating.
George Washington's Expense Account.
I love that.
Yes, and that was one of my bestsellers, and I was only the co-author of that. It's by General George Washington and Marvin Kitman, PFC retired. And this was, people don't realize that when he was elected commander-in-chief, he told the Congress, I want no salary, just pick up my expenses in the war against British tyranny. And for 8 years, he kept a careful record of this. And, and I was working on my other book, The Making of the President, 1789, and I came across this document. You know, it came out in the 1840s. My God, this is his expense account. And it had all of the bar bills and all of his travels and the retreats he put on the expense account.
So he lived very well. Document. So we've come to the end of this thing. Have you ever been a stand-up comic?
No, I'm a serious journalist.
Oh, all right.
But
you have a good sense of humor, so
well,
maybe I thought your next career. Are you working on another book?
Oh, I'm not going to discuss it.
Okay.
But I just wanted to say that I hope I've said something on this show to make O'Reilly sue me, and because it's only
well, then we'll have another resurgence of sales.
Yes.
Right. Thank you very much, Marvin Kitman. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.